I'm William Stibor. Join us now for an evening of holiday readings from Hastings College, recorded live at Fur Hall on the Hastings College campus earlier this month. We'll hear some favorite old chestnuts as well as a few new holiday gems. So let's ring in the new year with Professor of English Darrel Lloyd and Emeritus Professor of Theater Harrold Shiffler.
The first things that we want to read for you are recipes which we think maybe will help you in your holiday baking, cooking. They're very special, and I know that if you have pen and paper, I'm sure you'll want to jot these down.
From Edward Lear, to make an oblongus pie. Take 4 pounds, say 4.5 pounds, of fresh oblonguses and put them in a small pipkin. Now cover them with water and boil them for 8 hours incessantly, after which add 2 pints of new milk and proceed to boil for 4 hours more. Now when you have ascertained that the oblonguses are quite soft, take them out and place them in a wide pan, taking care to shake them well previously. Grate some nutmeg over the surface and cover them carefully with powdered gingerbread, curry powder, and a sufficient quantity of cayenne pepper. Now remove the pan into the next room, place it on the floor, bring it back again, and let it simmer for 3/4 of an hour. Shake the pan violently till all the oblonguses have become of a pale purple color. Then, having prepared the paste, insert the whole carefully, adding at the same time a small pigeon, 2 slices of beef, 4 cauliflowers, and any number of oysters. Watch patiently till the crust begins to rise. Add a pinch of salt from time to time. Serve up in a clean dish and throw the whole mess out of the window as fast as possible.
This recipe came to me by way of Marilyn Sockleton, who said, I think, that it was her great-great-great-grandmother's. Whether or not she makes this every year, I'm not sure, but I know you'll want this recipe because it gives you such a good feeling. It's called the best rum cake ever. And the ingredients are 1 or 2 quarts of rum, 1 cup butter, 1 teaspoon sugar, 2 large eggs, 1 cup dried fruit, baking powder, 1 teaspoon soda, lemon juice, brown sugar, and nuts. Before you start, sample the rum to check for quality. Good, isn't it? Now go ahead. Select a large mixing bowl, measuring cup, etc., and check the rum again, because it must be just right. To be sure the rum is of the highest quality, pour 1 level cup of rum into a glass and drink it as fast as you can. Repeat. With an electric mixer, beat 1 cup of butter into a large, fluffy bowl. Add 1 teaspoon of sugar and beat again. Meanwhile, make sure that the rum is of the finest quality. Try another cup. Open 2nd quart if necessary. Add 2 large legs, 2 cups of fried fruit, and beat till high. If the fruit gets stuck in the beaters, just pry it loose with a screwdriver. Sample the rum again, checking for its toxicity. Next, sift 3 cups of pepper or salt. Really doesn't matter. Sample the rum again. Sift 1/2 pint of lemon juice. Fold in chopped butter and strained nuts. Add 1 tablespoon of brown sugar or whatever color you can find. Mix well. Grease the oven and turn the cake pan to 350 degrees. Now pour the whole mess into the oven and bake. Now check the rum again and go to bed. Whatever.
I think he should rest. Well, after the rum cake, to make Gosky patties, procure a pig, 3 or 4 years of age, and tie him by the off hind leg to a post. Place 5 pounds of currants, 3 of sugar, 2 pecks of peas, 18 roast chestnuts, a candle, and 6 bushels of turnips within his reach. If he eats these, constantly provide him with more. Then procure some cream, some slices of Cheshire cheese, 4 quires of foolscap paper, and a packet of black pins. Work the whole into a paste and spread it out to dry on a sheet of clean, brown, waterproof linen. Now, when the paste is perfectly dry, but not before, proceed to beat the pig violently with the handle of a large broom. If he squeals, beat him again. Visit the paste and beat the pig alternately for some days and ascertain if at the end of that period the whole is about to turn into Gosky patties. Now, if it does not then, it never will. And in that case, the pig may be let loose and the whole process may be considered as finished. I had a little rum cake there near the end.
I told you I was sure you'd want all those recipes, and we'll be around afterwards in case you'd like to jot them down. We're changing the program a little bit this evening in deference to our young friends. And instead of doing Christmas vignettes, I'd like to do, at this time, a poem that I think everyone knows and has known for a long time. It was written in 1849 by Clement Moore. And after the title page, he says that the poem is for good little boys and girls. 'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas soon would be there. And the children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their heads. And Mamma in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap. When, out on the lawn, there arose such a clatter, I sprang from the bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew, like a flash, and tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new-fallen snow gave the luster of midday to objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer, with a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donder and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall. Now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle, mount to the sky, so up to the housetop the coursers they flew, with the sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling, I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. And as I drew in my head and was turning around, Down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur, from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes, how they twinkled, his dimples, how merry, and his cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke, it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. And I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk, and laying his finger aside of his nose and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to his sleigh, to his team, gave a whistle, and away they all flew like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night."
A little piece written by Marchetta Shute called Presents or Christmas Presents. I wanted a rifle for Christmas. I wanted a bat and a ball. I wanted some skates and a bicycle, but I didn't want mittens at all. I wanted a whistle. I wanted a knife. I wanted a pocket knife that shut up tight. I wanted some boots and I wanted a kit. I didn't want mittens one little bit. I told them I don't like mittens. I told them as plain as plain. I told them I didn't want mittens. And they've given me mittens again. That sounds familiar. Charles Dickens exemplifies the spirit of Christmas with A Christmas Carol, and Hal is going to read from that in the second half. Charles Dickens is also my favorite writer, and I try to work him in wherever I can, even in courses where he doesn't belong. I've been known to talk about the Dickensian influence on Shakespeare, as a matter of fact. But a lot of people don't realize how much Christmas infects Charles Dickens' novels. And the opening of what I think is his very best novel, Great Expectations, takes place, as a matter of fact, on Christmas Eve. You wouldn't necessarily know it from that first chapter. You have to read another chapter or two to find that out when you get to the Christmas day at Joe Gargery and Mrs. Joe's. But this opening scene of Great Expectations, in fact, does take place on Christmas Eve. So, with that slight excuse, I'm including the first chapter. Ghost stories come up at Christmas, too. My father's family name being Pierup, and my Christian name Philip, my infant tongue could make of both names nothing longer or more explicit than Pip, so I called myself Pip and came to be called Pip. Now I give Pierup as my father's family name on the authority of his tombstone and my sister, Mrs. Joe Gargery, who married the blacksmith. As I never saw my father or my mother, and never saw any likeness of either of them, for their days were long before the days of photographs, my first fancies regarding what they were like were unreasonably derived from their tombstones. The shape of the letters on my father's gave me an odd idea that he was a square, stout, dark man with curly black hair. From the character and turn of the inscription, also Georgiana, wife of the above, I drew a childish conclusion that my mother was freckled and sickly. to 5 little stone lozenges, each about 1.5 feet long, which were arranged in a neat row beside their grave, and were sacred to the memory of 5 little brothers of mine who gave up trying to get a living exceedingly early in that universal struggle. I am indebted for a belief I religiously entertain that they had all been born on their backs with their hands in their trousers pockets and had never taken them out in this state of existence. Now ours was a marsh country, down by the river, within, as the river wound, 20 miles of the sea. My first, most vivid and broad impression of the identity of things seems to me to have been gained on a memorable raw afternoon towards evening. At such a time I found out for certain that this bleak place overgrown with nettles was a churchyard, and that Philip Pierrep, late of this parish, and also Georgiana, wife of the above, were dead and buried, and that Alexander, Bartlemy, Abraham, Tobias, and Roger, infant children of the aforesaid, were also dead and buried, and that the dark, flat wilderness beyond the churchyard, intersected with dikes and mounds and gates with scattered cattle feeding on it, was the marshes, and that the low leaden line beyond was the river, and that the distant savage lair from which the wind was rushing was the sea, and that the small bundle of shivers growing afraid of it all and beginning to cry was Pip. "Hold your noise!" cried a terrible voice as a man started up from among the graves at the side of the church porch. "Keep still, you little devil, or I'll cut your throat." A fearful man, all in coarse gray, with a great iron on his leg, a man with no hat and with broken shoes, with an old rag tied round his head. A man who had been soaked in water and smothered in mud and lamed by stones and cut by flints and stung by nettles and torn by briars, who limped and shivered and glared and growled and his teeth chattered in his head as he seized me by the chin. Don't cut my throat, sir," I pleaded in terror. "Play, don't do it, sir." "Tell us your name, quick." "Pip, Pip, Pip, sir." "Once more," said the man, staring at me. "Give it mouth." "Pip, Pip, sir." "Show us where you live. Bite out the place." I pointed to where our village lay on the flat inshore among the alder trees and pollards, a mile or more from the church. The man, after looking at me for a moment, turned me upside down and emptied my pockets. There was nothing in them but a piece of bread. Now, when the church came to itself, for he was so sudden and strong that he made it go head over heels before me, and I saw the steeple under my feet, when the church came to itself, I say, I was seated on a high tombstone, trembling, while he ate the bread ravenously. "You young dog," said the man, licking his lip, "what fat cheeks you ha' got." Well, I believe they were fat, though I was at that time undersized for my years and not strong. "Darn me if I couldn't eat 'em," said the man with a threatening shake of his head, "and if I hadn't half a mind to do it." I earnestly expressed my hope that he wouldn't, and held tighter to the tombstone on which he had put me, partly to keep myself upon it, partly to keep myself from crying. "Now, looky here," said the man. "Where is your mither?" "There, sir," said I. He started, made a short run, and stopped and looked over his shoulder. There, sir," I timidly explained. "Also, Georgiana. That's my mither." "Ah, and is that your father along of your mither?" "Yes, sir. Him too, late of this parish." "Ah. Who do you live with? Supposing you're kindly let to live, which I hadn't made up my mind about." "My sister, sir, Mrs. Joe Gargery, wife of Joe Gargery, the blacksmith, sir. Blacksmith there," said he, and looked down at his leg. After darkly looking at his leg and at me several times, he came closer to my tombstone, took me by both arms, and tilted me back as far as he could hold me, so that his eyes looked most powerfully down into mine, and mine looked most helplessly up into his. "Now, looky here," he said. "The question being whether you're to be let to live. You know what a file is?" "Yes, sir." "And you know what wittles is?" "Yes, sir." After each question, he tilled me over a little more so as to give me a greater sense of helplessness and danger. "Oh, you get me a file," he tilted me again. "And you get me wittles," he tilted me again. You bring 'em both to me, he tilted me again, or I'll have your heart and liver out. He tilted me again. I was dreadfully frightened, so giddy that I clung to him with both hands and said, If you would kindly please to let me keep upright, sir, perhaps I shouldn't be sick, and perhaps I could attend more. He gave me a most tremendous dip and roll, so the church jumped over its own weathercock. Then he held me by the arms in an upright position on the top of the stone and went on in these fearful terms. Now, you bring me tomorrow morning early that file and them whittles. You bring the lot to me at the old battery over yonder. You do it, and you never dare to say a word or dare to make a sign concerning your having seen such a person as me or any person somever, and you shall be let to live. But you fail, or you go from my words in any particular, no matter how small it is, and your heart and your liver shall be tore out, roasted, and ate. Now, I ain't alone, as you may think I am. There's a young man hid with me, in comparison with which young man I am an angel. That young man hears the words I speak. That young man has a secret way peculiar to himself of getting at a boy and at his heart and at his liver. It is in vain for a boy to attempt to hide himself from that young man. A boy may lock his door, may be warm in bed, may tuck himself up, may draw the clothes over his head, may think himself comfortable and safe, but that young man will softly creep his way to him and tear him open. I am a-keeping that young man from harming of you at the present moment with great difficulty. I find it very hard to hold that young man off of your inside. Now, what do you say? I said that I would get him the file, and I would get him what broken bits of food I could, and I would come to him with the battery early in the morning. Say, Lord, strike you dead if you don't, said the man. I said so. And he took me down. Now, you remember what you've undertook, and you remember that young man, and you get home. Good night, sir, I faltered. Much of that, said he, glancing about him over the cold, wet flat. I wish I was a frog or a eel. At the same time, he hugged his shuddering body in both his arms, clasping himself as if to hold himself together, and limped towards the low church wall. As I saw him go, picking his way among the nettles and among the brambles that bound the green mounds, he looked in my young eyes as if he were eluding the hands of the dead people stretching up cautiously out of their graves to get a twist upon his ankle and pull him in. When he came to the low church wall, he got over it, like a man whose legs were numbed and stiff, and then turned round to look for me. When I saw him turning, I set my face towards home and made the best use of my legs. But presently I looked over my shoulder and saw him going on again towards the river, still hugging himself in both arms and picking his way with his sore feet among the great stones dropped into the marshes here and there for stepping places when the rains were heavy or when the tide was in. The marshes were just a long black horizontal line then, as I stopped to look after him. And the river was just another horizontal line, not nearly so broad nor yet so black. And the sky was just a row of long, angry red lines and dense black lines intermixed. On the edge of the river, I could faintly make out the only two black things in all the prospect that seemed to be standing upright. One of these was a beacon by which the sailors steered, like an unhooked cask upon a pole, an ugly thing when you were near it. The other a gibbet, with some change hanging to it, which had once held a pirate. The man was limping on towards this ladder as if he were the pirate come to life and come down and going back to hook himself up again. It gave me a terrible turn when I thought so. And as I saw the cattle lifting their heads to gaze after him, I wondered whether they thought so too. I looked all around for the horrible young man and could see no signs of him. But now I was frightened again and ran home without stopping.
From the sublimity of Dickens to the ridiculousness of whoever wrote this. This is by that great writer Annan. Picture this. Large, glistening flakes have been softly falling since early this afternoon. The earth is covered with a downy blanket of cotton candy snow. All is silence and peace on the northern landscape. It's Christmas Eve, and you've just put the finishing touch on the oyster stew. Another dash of white pepper to make it absolutely perfect. The windows of your country kitchen are fogged from the happy baking that was warmed the room. Wiping your hands on the embroidered apron, you hear the sound of sleigh bells in the distance. You waltz to the bay window in the living room of your colorfully decorated colonial home. Rubbing a pane of glass with the heel of your hand, you see Ray and the children approaching. Having returned from delivering the tins of creamy fudge and decorated sugar cookies you make each year for your many dear friends who live in your small New England community. Opening the heavy wooden door with its magnificent wreath of pine cones and holly, you step briskly onto the porch, invigorated by the frosty snap of the crisp winter evening, enchanted by the scent of burning pine that penetrates the still night air. As the Clydesdales, Jimmy and Johnny, approach the house, Uncle Fred comes around the side, carrying an armload of wood that he's been chopping. He tumbles it into the old copper wash tub that sits on the front porch step and unhitches the horses. The children, eyes shining and cheeks rosy from the ride, scramble out of the sleigh and run to greet you. You wipe their runny noses with the clean hanky in your apron pocket. They don't protest when you do it, of course, because they're full of the joy of the season. While Ray and Uncle Fred tend to the horses, you lead the children into the house and help them remove their snow pants and coats and mittens and hats. And these are hung on the burnished brass coat tree that stands near the ancient pot-bellied stove, wherein a fire is crackling merrily. The children warm their hands and feet, appreciating the hot cocoa with marshmallows that you prepared for their arrival and left in an enameled coffee pot on the top of the stove. While they are toasting fingers and toes, you move to the living room, and charmed by the tinkling of the antique angel chimes, you drink in the combination of smells from the fresh-cut tree and the day's cooking aromas, and begin to hum along with the seasonal music playing softly on the stereo. All is calm, all is bright. You now glide into the dining room. The round oak table has a lovely green and red embroidered tablecloth which has been in the family for years. The gold-rimmed china gleams in the candlelight. A repast of roast ham, homemade sausage, sliced cold turkey, Swedish meatballs, oven-browned potatoes, scalloped corn, fresh fruit salad with whipped cream, homemade rye bread, fresh butter from the local creamery, homemade preserves, and, of course, those jumbo olives that the kids love graces the board. All that is needed now is the oyster stew and dessert. 14 different kinds of cookies and confections, all lovingly made from secret family recipes, beautifully arranged on glass platters that sit on the buffet. The door chimes sound, and you hear laughter permeate the entire house as Grandma and Grandpa come in. "Merry Christmas, everyone," they cry cheerily. "Grandpa, Grandma," exclaim the children as they race for hugs and kisses in the hallway. Your father has the same old red knapsack slung over his shoulder, the one he brings every year, filled with safe, educational, high-quality toys for the children and thoughtful, tasteful gifts for the adults. Your mother takes the sack from Grandpa and carefully places each beautifully wrapped package under the balsam pine that you and Ray cut only a few days before down by the river that runs through the pasture. Your mother exclaims over the fine muslin and lace ornaments that grace its even boughs and the small red candles that have been placed on the branches ready to be lit. But all this will happen later this evening. Right now, it's time for Christmas Eve dinner. You hear Ray and Uncle Fred enter through the back door and chide them with mock seriousness about tracking in snow all over your clean floor. And they return the good-natured banter and boom. Say, is there anything for 2 hungry men around here? We're starved. Well, I might be able to find something, you say with a twinkle in your eye. I'll just put another log on the fire, says Fred, and then we'll see what you've got. Dinner, everyone, you call from the kitchen door. You ladle your creamy oyster stew into a big white soup tureen, give a backward glance to the spotless kitchen, and present your Christmas specialty to the assembled loved ones who have seated themselves around the dining room table. There are oohs and ahs from Ray and Uncle Fred and from Mom and Dad and the children as you position the stew in the center of the table. It's beautiful as always, dear, says Ray. There is enthusiastic agreement on this score, and when all of the compliments have been paid, Ray says, let's pray. The children bow their angelic heads and fold their clean little hands. The rest of you pass smiles around and wink at each other, happy and content to be together once again in this warm, secure home. Because after all, it's Christmas. Does that sound like Christmas at your house? Well, maybe the next scenario is a little closer to your experience. Where are they? You mutter to yourself as you cram yet another greasy pan into the overcrowded dishwasher. It's approaching 88 degrees in your crowded kitchen, and the floor is both gritty and sticky from accumulated sugar spills and the residue of the mustard that crashed onto the linoleum when you opened the overflowing refrigerator this afternoon. If they don't get back soon, I won't be responsible for this stew. As you slam the dishwasher closed, you see headlights beam onto the garage and hear a car slosh noisily through the sleet that's been falling all that afternoon. As the car door opens, you hear one of the children scream as if in mortal anguish. Jim yells at them both and comes stomping across the driveway and into the house carrying an armload of plastic Christmas plates filled with broken cookies. What are those? Oh, sorry, honey, half the people weren't there. Should I have left them on the doorstep? Well, if half of them weren't there, what took you so long? Well, the boys weren't very cooperative, for one thing. They broke a potpourri jar of Miss Wilkinson's. Oh, you're kidding. Well, I wish I was. She was really nice about it, but boy, what a mess. I also had some last-minute shopping to do, he says, and produces a small package from his coat. You knew I was waiting for you. I need help to get everything on before your mom and dad get here. Where's Howard? Can't he help? Well, Howard's sitting in front of TV watching boxing and drinking beer. Now, honestly, if he comes to the table soused, I'll go talk to him. But what about the kids? They can sit out in the car until morning for all I care. I've had it with the kids. Go out and bring them in and give them a cookie or something. Try to get them in a good mood. It's Christmas, for heaven's sakes. I don't want it ruined. And your lips start to quiver. All right, but they've had a lot of cookies already. They kept sneaking them out of the plates. Oh, forget it. Just get them inside. Get them washed up. They can help me with the food. Or work on the fire. It's not doing too well. Well, that's because the wood's wet. Well, why couldn't we get some dry wood for Christmas? We should have bought some if ours was too green. Hey, you want me to go down to 7-Eleven and get some? No. Why can't you look at the clock and see what time it is? Your mom and dad are supposed to be here any minute, and we're not even close to being ready. All right. Honey, you gotta relax. That lip quivers again, and the tears start coming too. Well, when it's over, maybe I'll relax, but right now I'm busy. I've been on my feet all day, my arches have fallen, my calves are killing me, my lower back has shooting pains, and I burned my wrist on the steam from that darn stew. And I've got a headache from eating fudge all day. I haven't had any real food for 24 hours. Well, all right, I'll get the kids. I think they've quit screaming. As Jim leaves, you indulge yourselves in 2 minutes of tears before wiping your eyes on the sour-smelling dish towel that you retrieve from the floor. Just then the front doorbell rings, and your mother and father-in-law waltz in with a hearty, "Merry Christmas, everyone." "Hi, Mom, Dad. Everyone isn't here. Jim and the kids should be coming back soon. Howard's watching TV. Your father-in-law races for the family room, detouring through the kitchen to pick up a beer from the refrigerator. Your mother-in-law is carrying 2 shopping bags full of toys. She plops them down by the tree, and the resultant swoosh of air causes a few hundred more needles to fall off the branches. "That tree's going fast, dear," she remarks helpfully. "Oh, it's so hard to get a decent tree. That's why Dad and I gave up. We like our artificial tree. It's so easy to put up. It's more economical in the long run. How much do you pay for that dried up old thing?" "Well, we like cut trees, Mom." "Well, so do I, dear, but there's hardly anything left of that one." "Well, can I take your coat?" "Oh, no, I have to get the rest of the presents." "Oh, you give them too much." "Well, what are grandparents for, dear?" And she assumes a mock serious tone. "It's my sworn duty to spoil those kids rotten. I'll get the rest of the presents," she says as she slips out the front door. You peek into the bag, knowing that they have overextended themselves again on a glut of cheap, sharp-edged toys, half of which run on batteries that they neglected to buy. The gifts that you and Jim picked out so carefully for the boys will look pitiful next to this shine and glitter. By the time your mother-in-law returns with her 4th and final armload of presents, the children have decided to join the rest of the family. They rush to Grandma begging, "Do you have anything for us, Grandma? Do you have a treat?" "Well, of course I do, Munchkins. Here you go." And she pulls 2 giant plastic candy canes from her purse and hands them to the boys. They are filled with jawbreaker bubblegum balls, which the children promptly insert into their mouths, competing to see how many they can stuff in at one time. Now, your pleas of "Don't spoil your appetite, we're going to eat soon," are unheeded by the energetic youngsters, who are now all smiles, albeit sugar-induced, who race up to their bedroom to count the remaining candies. "So, what can I do to help?" says your mother-in-law as the 2 of you make your way through a mess of toys and newspapers into the kitchen. "Well, not a thing, Mom. Why don't you just go into the living room and relax? I can handle everything just fine." "Well, maybe I could wash some of those pots and pans and give you a little more counter space. You know, you really should have a microwave." "And where would I put that?" "Now, really, I don't want a microwave." "Well, they have those space-saver models that you hang down from your cupboard." "My cupboards are too low for that. I'd still lose the counter space." "Oh, I don't think so." And you decide to drop the subject right there, highly suspicious that she's brought you a microwave oven for Christmas. A space saver, and you don't want a microwave. You begin to ladle the curdled stew into ceramic bowls from the stove. "Go call the guys and the kids, will you, Mom?" you ask. "Tell them we're eating right now." You place the bowls at the appropriate places on the table. "Oh, that cloth isn't really a Christmas green," you observe as you eye the table critically. "It's more like chartreuse. Oh, I wish I had enough place settings of the good china," as you place a Melmac plate at your seat. The oyster stew is served, and still no one is at the table. "It's on!" you shout into the family room. The men there are oblivious to your cry, totally engrossed in a videotape of the 8th round of a regional welterweight amateur bout. Your mother-in-law is now up in the bedroom helping the kids count their jawbreakers. "Dinner!" you cry once again. Still, no takers. You ease yourself stiffly into your chair, untie your soiled apron, and fling it into the kitchen. You survey the dinner of sliced turkey and ham from the deli, brown and served dinner rolls, ambrosia fruit salad, raw vegetables and dip, Jell-O salad, and of course, cold oyster stew. Cradling your throbbing head in your chapped hands, you bow your head and say, "Lord, give me strength to withstand another Christmas."
Next to Dickens' The Christmas Carol, probably the most famous piece about Christmas is one by the Welsh poet Dylan Thomas. And having more than a little Welsh blood in me, I like to read this at Christmas. It's called A Child's Christmas in Wales. One Christmas was so much like another, in those years around the Seatown corner now, and out of all sound except the distant speaking of the voices I sometimes hear a moment before sleep, that I can never remember whether it snowed for 6 days and 6 nights when I was 12, or whether it snowed for 12 days and 12 nights when I was 6. All the Christmases rolled down toward the two-tongued sea like a cold and headlong moon bundling down the sky that was our street. And they stop at the rim of the ice-edged, fish-freezing waves, and I plunge my hands in the snow and bring out whatever I can find. In goes my hand into that wool-white, bell-tongued ball of holidays resting at the rim of the carol-singing sea, and out come Mrs. Prothero and the fireman. Well, it was on the afternoon of the day of Christmas Eve, and I was in Mrs. Prothero's garden waiting for cats with her son Jim. It was snowing. It was always snowing at Christmas. December, in my memory, is white as Lapland, though there were no reindeers. But there were cats. Patient, cold, and callous, our hands wrapped in socks, we waited to snowball the cats. Sleek and long as jaguars and horrible whiskered, spitting and snarling, they would slink and sidle over the white-backed garden walls, and the lynx-eyed hunters, Jim and I, fur-capped and moccasin trappers from Hudson Bay, off Mumbles Road, would hurl our deadly snowballs at the green of their eyes. But the wise cats never appeared. We were so still, Eskimo-footed Arctic marksmen in the muffling silence of the eternal snows, eternal ever since Wednesday, that we never heard Mrs. Prothero's first cry from her igloo at the bottom of the garden. Or, if we heard it at all, it was to us like the far-off challenge of our enemy and prey, the neighbor's polar cat. But soon the voice grew louder. "Fire!" cried Mrs. Prothero, and she beat the dinner gong. And we ran down the garden with the snowballs in our arms toward the house, and smoke indeed was pouring out of the dining room, and the gong was bombulating, and Mrs. Prothero was announcing ruin like a town crier in Pompeii. Oh, this was better than all the cats in Wales, standing on the wall in a row. We bounded into the house laden with snowballs and stopped at the open door of the smoke-filled room. Something was burning, all right. Well, perhaps it was Mr. Prothero, who always slept there after midday dinner with a newspaper over his face. But he was standing in the middle of the room saying, "A fine Christmas," and smacking at the smoke with a slipper. "Call the fire brigade," cried Mrs. Prothero as she beat the gong. "They won't be there," said Mr. Prothero. "It's Christmas." Oh, there was no fire to be seen, only clouds of smoke, and Mr. Prothero standing in the middle of them, waving his slipper as though he were conducting. "Do something," he said. And we threw all our snowballs into the smoke. I think we missed Mr. Prothero and ran out of the house to the telephone box. "Well, let's call the police as well," Jim said, "and the ambulance." And Ernie Jenkins, he likes fires. But we only called the fire brigade, and soon the fire engine came in, and 3 men in tall helmets brought a hose into the house, and Mr. Prothero got out just in time before they turned it on. Well, nobody could have had a noisier Christmas Eve, and when the firemen turned off the hose and were standing in the wet, smoky room, Jim's aunt, Miss Prothero, came downstairs and peered in at them. Jim and I waited very quietly to hear what she would say to them. She said the right thing, always. She looked at the 3 tall firemen in their shining helmets standing among the smoke and cinders and dissolving snowballs, and she said, "Well, would you like anything to read?" Birds the color of red flannel petticoats whisked past the harp-shaped hills, when we sang and wallowed all night and day in caves that smelt like Sunday afternoons in damp front farmhouse parlors, and we chased, with the jawbones of deacons, the English and the bears, before the motor car, before the wheel, before the Duchess face horse, when we rode the daft and happy hills bareback, it snowed and it snowed. But here a small boy says, well, it snowed last year too. I made a snowman, and my brother knocked it down, and I knocked my brother down, and then we had tea. But that was not the same snow, I say. Our snow was not only shaken from whitewash buckets down the sky, it came shawling out of the ground and swam and drifted out of the arms and hands and bodies of trees. Snow grew overnight on the roofs of the houses like a pure and grandfather moss, minutely white-ivied the walls, and settled on the postman, opening a gate like a dumb, numb thunderstorm of white, torn Christmas cards. Well, were there postmen then, too? With sprinkling eyes and wind-cherried noses on spread frozen feet, they crunched up to the doors and mittened on them manfully. But all that the children could hear was a ringing of bells. You mean that the postman went and the doors rang? I mean that the bells that the children could hear were inside them. I only hear thunder sometimes, never bells. Well, there were church bells, too. Inside them? No. In the bat-black, snow-white belfries tugged by bishops and storks. And they rang their tidings over the bandaged town, over the frozen foam of the powder and ice cream hills, over the crackling sea. It seemed that all the churches boomed for joy under my window, and the weathercocks crew for Christmas on our fence. Well, get back to the postmen. They were just ordinary postmen, fond of walking and dogs and Christmas and the snow. They knocked on the doors with blue knuckles. Ours has got a black knocker. And then they stood on the white welcome mat in the little drifted porches and huffed and puffed, making ghosts with their breath, and jogged from foot to foot like small boys wanting to go out. And then the presents, after the Christmas box. And the cold postman with the rose on his button nose tingled down a tea-tray slithered run of the chilly glinting hill. He went in his ice-bound boots like a man on fishmonger's slabs. He wagged his back like a frozen camel's hump, dizzily turned the corner on one foot, and begod, he was gone. Well, get back to the presents. Well, there were the useful presents, engulfing mufflers of the old coach days and mittens made for giant sloths. Zebra scarves of a substance like silky gum that could be tug-o-war down to the galoshes, blinding tam-o'-shanters like patchwork tea cozies, and bunny-suited busbies and balaclavas for victims of head-shrinking tribes. For ants who always wore wool next to the skin, there were mustached and rasping vests that make you wonder why the ants had any skin left at all. And once I had a little crochet nose bag from an ant, now, alas, no longer whinnying with us, and pictureless books in which small boys, though warned with quotations not to, would skate on Farmer Giles's pond, and did, and drowned, and books that told me everything about the wasp, except why. Well, go on to the useless presents. Bags of moist and many-colored jelly babies and a folded flag and a false nose and a tram conductor's cap and a machine that punched tickets and rang a bell. Never a catapult. Once by mistake that no one could explain, a little hatchet, and a celluloid duck that made, when you pressed it, a most unduck-like sound, a mewing moo that an ambitious cat might make who wished to be a cow, and a painting book in which I could make the grass, the trees, the sea, and the animals any color I pleased, and still the dazzling sky-blue sheep are grazing in the red field under the rainbow-billed and pea-green birds. Hard-boils, toffee, fudge, and all sorts, crunches, cracknels, humbugs, glaciers, marzipan, and butter Welsh for the Welsh. And troops of bright tin soldiers who, if they could not fight, could always run. And snakes and families and happy ladders and easy hobby games for little engineers, complete with instructions. Oh, easy for Leonardo. And a whistle to make the dogs bark, to wake up the old man next door, to make him beat on the wall with his stick, to shake our picture off the wall. And a packet of cigarettes. You put one in your mouth, and you stood at the corner of the street, and you waited for hours, in vain, for an old lady to scold you for smoking. And then with a smirk, he ate the cigarette. And then it was breakfast under the balloons. Were there uncles like at our house? Oh, there are always uncles at Christmas. The same uncles. And on our Christmas mornings with dog-disturbing whistle and sugar fags, I would scour the Swatch town for the news of the little world and find always a dead bird by the white post office or by the deserted swings. Perhaps a robin, all but one of his fires out. Men and women waiting or scooping back from chapel with taproom noses and wind-bust cheeks, all albinos, huddled their stiff, black, jarring feathers against the irreligious snow. Mistletoe hung from the gas brackets in all the front parlors. There was sherry and walnuts and bottled beer and crackers by the dessert spoons. And cats in their furabouts watched the fires. And the high heap fire spat all ready for the chestnuts and the mulling pokers. Some few large men sat in the front parlors without their collars, uncles, almost certainly, trying their new cigars, holding them out judiciously at arm's length, returning them to their mouths, coughing, and then holding them out again as though waiting for the explosion. And some few small ants, not wanted in the kitchen, nor anywhere else for that matter, sat on the very edges of their chairs, poised and brittle, afraid to break like faded cups and saucers. Not many of those mornings trod the piling streets, an old man always, fawn-bowlered, yellow-gloved, and at this time of year with spats of snow, would take his constitutional to the white bowling green and back, as he would take it, wet or fine, on Christmas Day or Doomsday. Sometimes two hale young men with big pipes blazing, no overcoats and wind-blown scarfs, would trudge unspeaking down to the forlorn sea to work up an appetite, to blow away the fumes, who knows, to walk into the waves until nothing of them was left, the two curling smoke clouds of their inextinguishable briars. And then I would be slapdashing home. The smell of the gravy, of the dinners of others, the bird smell, the brandy, the pudding and mince, coiling up to my nostrils, when out of a snow-clogged side lane would come a boy, the spit of myself, with a pink-tipped cigarette and a violet past of a black eye, cocky as a bullfinch, leering all to himself. Oh, I hated him on sight and sound, and would be about to put my dog whistle to my lips and blow him off the face of Christmas, when suddenly he, with a violet wink, put his whistle to his lips and blew so stridently, so high, so exquisitely loud that gobbling faces, their cheeks bulged with goose, would press against their tinseled windows the whole length of the white echoing street. For dinner, we had turkey and blazy pudding, and after dinner, the uncles sat in front of the fire, loosened all the buttons, put their large, moist hands over their watch chains, groaned a little, and slept. Mothers, aunts, and sisters scuttled to and fro, bearing tureens. Auntie Bessie, who had already been frightened twice by a clockwork mouse, whimpered at the sideboard and had some elderberry wine. The dog was sick. Auntie Dosey had to have 3 aspirin. But Annie Hannah, who liked port, stood in the middle of the snowbound backyard singing like a big bosom thrush. I would blow up balloons to see how big they would blow up to, and when they burst, which they all did, the uncles jumped and rumbled. In the rich and heavy afternoon, the uncles breathing like dolphins, and the snow descending, I would sit among festoons and Chinese lanterns and nibble dates, and try to make a model man-of-war following those instructions for little engineers, and produce what might be mistaken for a seagoing tram car. Then I would go out, my bright new boots squeaking, into the white world, onto the seaward hill, to call on Jim and Dan and Jack, and to pad through the still streets, leaving huge, deep footprints on the hidden pavements. I bet people will think there's been hippos. Well, what would you do if you saw a hippo coming down our street? I'd go like this, bang! I'd throw him over the railings and roll him down the hill, and then I'd tickle him under the ear, and he'd wag his tail. Well, what would you do if you saw 2 hippos? Iron-flanked and bellowing, he-hippos clanked and battered through the scudding snow toward us as we passed Mr. Daniel's house. Let's post Mr. Daniel a snowball through his letterbox. Let's write things in the snow. Let's write, Mr. Daniel looks like a spaniel all over his lawn. Or we walked on the white shore. Can the fishes see it snowing? The silent, one-clouded heavens drifted on to the sea. Now we were snow-blind travelers lost in the north hills, and vast dewlap dogs with flasks round their necks ambled and shambled up to us, baying Excelsior. We returned home through the poor streets, where only a few children fumbled with bare red fingers in the wheel-rutted snow and catcalled after us, their voices fading away as we trudged uphill into the cries of the dock birds and a hooting of ships out in the whirling bay. And then, at tea, the recovered uncles would be jolly, and the ice cake loomed in the center of the table like a marble grave. Auntie Hannah laced her tea with rum. Oh, because it was, after all, only once a year. Bring out the tall tales now that we told by the fire as a gaslight bubbled like a diver. Ghosts swooed like owls in the long nights when I dared not look over my shoulder. Animals lurked in the cubbyhole under the stairs where the gas meter ticked. And I remember that we went singing carols once, when there wasn't the shaving of a moon to light the flying streets. At the end of a long road was a drive that led to a large house, and we stumbled up the darkness of the drive that night, each one of us afraid, each one holding a stone in his hand in case, and all of us too brave to say a word. The wind through the trees made noises of old and unpleasant, and maybe web-footed men wheezing in caves. We reached the black bulk of the house. What shall we give them? Hark the herald? Nah, Jack said. Good King Wenceslas. I'll count 3. 1, 2, 3, and we began to sing, our voices high and seemingly distant in the snow-felted darkness round the house that was occupied by nobody we knew. We stood close together near the dark door. Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen. And then a small, dry voice, like the voice of someone who has not spoken for a long time, joined our singing. A small, dry, eggshell voice from the other side of the door. A small, dry voice through the keyhole. And when we stopped running, we were outside our house. The front room was lovely. Balloons floated into the hot water bottle, gulping gas. Everything was good again and shone over the town. Perhaps it was a ghost, Jim said. Perhaps it was trolls, Dan said. He was always reading. Let's go in and see if there's any jelly left, Jack said. And we did that. Always on Christmas night, there was music. An uncle played the fiddle, a cousin sang Cherry Ripe, and another uncle sang Drake's drum. It was very warm in the little house. Auntie Hannah, who had got on to the parsnip wine by now, sang a song about bleeding hearts and death, and then another in which she said her heart was like a bird's nest. And then everybody laughed again. And then I went to bed. And looking through my bedroom window out into the moonlight and the unending smoke-colored snow, I could see the lights in the windows of all the other houses on our hill and hear the music rising from them up the long, steadily falling night. I turned the gas down. I got into bed. I said some words to the close and holy darkness, and then I slept.
Year was 1843. The city was London, and the man was Dickens. Dickens had a Christmas story in mind, and because he needed funds, as he often did, he wrote it in a very short time and sent it to his publisher. His profits were negligible because he had insisted on a deluxe edition of the book. But since that first printing of A Christmas Carol, it has been published in many editions, and with the exception of the translated versions of the biblical account of the birth of Christ, I think it's become the best known and very probably the best loved Christmas story in the English language. And this, as you perhaps know, is the 150th year of A Christmas Carol. If you read your World Herald this morning, some of you may have read, what was the living section, I believe? A wonderful resume of how Dickens came to write Christmas Carol, and I would urge you to read it if you haven't. Marley was dead to begin with. Scrooge knew he was dead. Oh, well, of course he did. How could it be otherwise? Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole assign, his sole residuary legatee, and his sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. Scrooge never painted out old Marley's name. There it stood, years afterwards above the warehouse door, Scrooge and Marley's. Sometimes people new to the business called Scrooge Scrooge and sometimes Marley, but he answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret and self-contained and solitary as an oyster. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. And even the blind men's dogs appeared to know him. And when they saw him coming on, they'd tug their owners up doorways and into courts, and then wag their tails as if to say, "No eye at all is better than an evil eye, master." Oh, but what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. Now, once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting weather, foggy withal, and he could hear the people in the court outside go wheezing up and down, beating their hands upon their breasts and stamping their feet upon the pavement stones to warm them. The city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. It had not been light all day, and candles were flaring in the windows of the neighboring offices like ruddy smears upon the palpable brown air. The fog came pouring in at every chink and keyhole and was so dense without that although the court was of the narrowest, the houses opposite were mere phantoms. The door of Scrooge's counting room was open that he might keep his eye upon his clerk by Bob Cratchit, who in a dismal little cell beyond was copying letters. Now, Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clock's fire was so much smaller that it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it, for Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room. And so surely as the clerk came in with the shovel, the master predicted that it might be necessary for them to part. Wherefore the clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at the candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. "Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, Fred, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. "Bah, humbug! Christmas a humbug, Uncle? Oh, you don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do. Merry Christmas? What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Well, come then, what right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough." And Scrooge, having no better answer ready on the spur of the moment, said "bah" again and followed it with humbug. "Don't be cross, Uncle. What else can I be? And I live in such a world of fools as this. Merry Christmas. Out upon a Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money, A time for finding yourself a year older but not an hour richer. A time for balancing your books and having every item in through a round dozen of months presented dead against you. Now, if I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart, he should. Uncle, now nephew, you keep Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine. Keep it, but you don't keep it. Well, let me leave it alone then. Much good it may do you, much good it's ever done you. Well, there are many things from which I might have derived good, by which I have not profited, I dare say, Christmas among the rest. But I'm sure that I've always thought of Christmas time when it's come around, apart from the veneration due its sacred name and origin, if anything belonging to it can be apart from that, as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, and the only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them as if they were really fellow passengers to the grave and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it's never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I say that it has do me good and will do me good, and I say God bless it. Now, Bob Cratchit involuntarily applauded, and becoming immediately sensible of the impropriety, he poked his fire and extinguished the last frail spark forever. Yeah, let me hear another sound from you, said Scrooge, and you'll keep your Christmas day by losing your situation. Hey, you're quite a powerful speaker, nephew. I wonder you don't go into Parliament. Don't be angry, Uncle. Come, dine with us tomorrow. Scrooge said that he would see him. Oh, yes, indeed he did. He went the whole length of the expression and said he would see him in that extremity first. But why? Why did you get married? Because I fell in love. Because you fell in love, growled Scrooge, as if that were the only thing in the world more ridiculous than a Merry Christmas. Good afternoon. Well, I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why can't we be friends? Good afternoon. I'm sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute, but I've made the trial in homage to Christmas, and I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last. So, Merry Christmas, Uncle. Good afternoon. And a Happy New Year. Good afternoon. His nephew left the room without an angry word, notwithstanding. Now, as you know, Scrooge reluctantly gives Cratchit Christmas Day off, the whole day, and remarks, a poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But he tells him to be very early there the next morning. And as you also know, Scrooge goes home to his dreary quarters, sees the door knocker change into Marley's face, and later is visited by Marley's ghost, a pitiable specter who says 3 visitors will come to Scrooge, even though Scrooge tries to say he'd rather not see them. And in addition, you know, the ghost of Christmas past appears, a small wisp of a figure, and shows the miser his former life as an unhappy boy, as an apprentice to Mr. Fezziwig, who hosts a jolly Christmas party in his warehouse for all of his employees, and as a young man in love, whose offer of marriage is turned down because of his growing greed for gold. The ghost of Christmas present comes on the scene, a great jolly giant of a fellow, and shows him Cratchit's home on Christmas Day with Mrs. Cratchit and the children, especially Tiny Tim, who uses a crutch, and who, without additional medical aid, will probably die, the spirit tells Scrooge. And he shows him the party at his nephew Fred's house, with its singing and its game playing, and then shows him 2 starving, glaring children, want and ignorance, and warns mankind of the doom which it can expect if something positive is not done for them. And then, as Marley's ghost had told Scrooge would happen after the second ghost had finished his visit, there was a striking of the bell 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it not. As the last stroke ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley, and lifting his eyes, beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded, coming straight towards him. The phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached, and when it came near him, Scrooge bent down upon his knees, for in the very air through which this spirit moved, it seemed to scatter gloom and mystery. It was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. But for this, it would have been difficult to detach its figure from the night and separate it from the darkness by which it was surrounded. I'm in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come. You're about to show me shadows of the things that have not happened but will happen in the time before us. Is that so, Spirit? The upper portion of the garment was contracted for an instant in its folds, as if the spirit had inclined its head. That was the only answer he received. Oh, lead on. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, Spirit. The phantom moved away as it had come towards him. Scrooge followed in the shadow of its dress, which bore him up, he thought, and carried him along. They scarcely seemed to enter the city, for the city rather seemed to spring up about them. But there they were in the heart of it, almost amongst the merchants who hurried up and down, and clinked the money in their pockets, and conversed in groups, and looked at their watches, and trifled thoughtfully with their great gold seals. The spirit stopped beside one little lot of businessmen, and observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk. "Oh," said a great fat man with a monstrous chin, "I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead." When did he die?" inquired another. "Oh, last night, I believe." "Why, what was the matter with him?" asked a third. "I thought he'd never die." "Well, God knows." "Well, what's he done with his money?" "Haven't heard. Left it to his company, perhaps. Hasn't left it to me. That's all I know." And this pleasantry was received with a general laugh. "Well, it's likely to be a very cheap funeral. Upon my life, I don't know of anyone to go to it. Suppose we make up a party and volunteer." "Well, I don't mind going if a lunch is provided, but I must be fed." And another laugh. Quiet and dark beside him stood the phantom with its outstretched hand. They left the busy scene and went into an obscure part of the town where Scrooge had never penetrated before. And wondering why and whither he had gone, he accompanied the spirit until they reached an iron gate. He paused to look around before entering. The spirit stood among the graves in a churchyard. Here then the wretched man whose name he had now to learn lay underneath the ground. The spirit pointed down to one. Before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the thing that will be, or are they shadows of things that may be only? And still the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following the finger read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name. Ebenezer Scrooge. Oh, no, Spirit, no. But the finger was still there. Oh, Spirit, hear me. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been. Why show me this if I am past all hope? And for the first time, the hand appeared to shake. Oh, good Spirit, your nature intercedes for me and pities me. Assure me that I may yet change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons that they teach. Oh, tell me that I may sponge away the writing on this stone. And holding up his hands in one last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrank, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all the time before him was his own to make amends in. Oh, Jacob Marley, heaven and Christmas time be praised for this. I say it on my knees, old Jacob, on my knees. Merry Christmas to everybody, a Happy New Year to all the world. And then he laughed. Really, for a man who'd been out of practice for so many years, it was a splendid laugh, a most illustrious laugh, the father of a long, long line of brilliant laughs. Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. What's today, my fine fellow? Cried Scrooge, calling downward to a boy in Sunday clothes. Today? Why, it's Christmas Day. Oh, it's Christmas Day, said Scrooge to himself. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. They can do anything they like. Of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow. Hello? Do you know the poulterers in the next street but one, at the corner? Well, I should hope I did. An intelligent boy. A remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging there? Not the little prize turkey, the big one. What, the one as big as me? Oh, what a delightful boy. It's a pleasure to talk with him. Yes, me buck. Well, it's hanging there now. Well, go and buy it and tell them to bring it here, that I may give them the direction where to take it. Come back with the man, and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes, and I'll give you half a crown. And the boy was off like a shot. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's. He shan't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. Now, the hand in which he wrote the address was not a steady one, but write it he did somehow, and went downstairs to open the street door, ready for the coming of the poulterer's man. As he stood there waiting his arrival, the knocker caught his eye. Oh, I shall love it as long as I live. I scarcely ever looked at it before. It's a wonderful knocker. Oh, here's the turkey. Hello, how are you? Merry Christmas. And it was a turkey. He could never have stood upon his legs, that bird. Now it's impossible to carry that to Camden Town. Oh, you must have a cab. And the chuckle with which he said this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy were to be exceeded only by the chuckle with which he sat breathless in his chair and chuckled till he cried. Well, shaving was not an easy task that morning, for his hand continued to shake very much. And shaving requires attention, even when you don't dance while you're at it. But if he had had to cut the end of his nose off, he would have put a piece of sticking plaster over it and been quite satisfied. In the afternoon, he turned his step towards his nephew's house. He passed the door 12 times before he had the courage to go up and knock, but he made a dash, and he did it. Is your master at home, my dear? Said Scrooge to the girl. Nice girl. Very. Well, he's in the dining room, sir, along with the mistress. I'll show you upstairs, if you please. Yankee, he knows me, said Scrooge, with his hand already on the dining room lock. He turned it gently and sidled his face in round the door. Fred? Bless my soul, who's that? Well, it's I, your Uncle Scrooge. I've come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred? Let him in? Oh, it's a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness. But he was at the office early the next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late, that was the thing he had his heart set upon. And he did it. Yes, he did. The clock struck 9, no Bob. 1/4 past, no Bob. He was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door open that he might see him come into the office. His hat was off before he opened the door, his comforter too, and he was on the stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. "Hello. What do you mean by coming here at this time of day?" "Well, I'm very sorry, sir. I am behind me time." "You are? Yes, I think you are. Step this way, sir, if you please." "Well, it's only once a year, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir." "I'll tell you what. I'm not going to stand for this any longer. Therefore, I'm going to raise your salary." Bob trembled and got a little nearer to the ruler. He had a momentary idea of knocking Scrooge down with it and calling to people in the court for help in a straight waistcoat. "A Merry Christmas, Bob. A merrier Christmas, my good fellow, than I've given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Now you make up the fires and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit." Well, Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, and as good a man as the good old city knew, or any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh, and little heeded them, for he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for good, at which some people did not have their fill of laughter at the outset. His own heart laughed. That was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with spirits, but he lived upon the total abstinence principle ever afterwards. And it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas well, if any man alive possessed the knowledge. May that be truly said of us, and all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone.
Well, we want to thank all of you for coming to share a cup of Christmas tea with us, and there's still some modified tea out in the lobby there, so please have some afterwards. We have 3 short pieces here to end with. The first one is by Gwendolyn Brooks, a favorite poet of mine, and it's a little poem called Otto. It's Christmas Day. I did not get the presents I had hoped for, yet it is not nice to frown or fret. To frown or fret would not be fair. My dad must never know I care. It's hard enough for him to bear. It's a poem about long times ago, not written by Guy Lombardo. It was written in 1788 by Robert Burns. And I'm going to dedicate this to a couple of travelers who just got back from Scotland, Ladd and Dee Cochran. So pseudo-Scotch lad, but that'll be good enough for you, you know. And for Jim McDougall, who is a Scotsman of the First Order and who will be traveling with us this summer to Scotland. Should old acquaintance be forgot and never brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot and old lang syne? For old lang syne, my dear, for old lang syne, we'll tak a cup of kindness yet for old lang syne. And surely ye'll be your pint stout, and surely I'll be mine. And we'll tak a cup of kindness yet for old lang syne. We twa heroon about the braes, and pulled the gowans fine, but we've wandered mony a weary feet sin old lang syne. We twa hae paddled in the burn frae morning sun till dine, but seas between us braid hae roared sin old lang syne. And there's a hand, my trusty fair, and gie's a hand o' thine, and we'll take a right good willy wat for old lang syne. For old lang syne, my dear, for old lang syne, we'll tak a cup o' kindness yet for old lang syne.
That looks ahead to New Year's, and Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote something which also looks to New Year's. This is from his In Memoriam. Ring out wild bells to the wild sky, the flying cloud, the frosty light. The year is dying in the night. Ring out wild bells and let him die. Ring out the old, ring in the new. Ring happy bells across the snow. The year is going, let him go. Ring out the false, ring in the true. Ring out the grief that saps the mind, for those that here we see no more. Ring out the feud of rich and poor. Bring in redress to all mankind. Ring out a slowly dying cause and ancient forms of party strife. Ring in the nobler modes of life with sweeter manners, purer laws. Ring out the want, the care, the sin, the faithless coldness of the times. Ring out my mournful rhymes, and ring the fuller minstrel in. Ring out false pride in place and blood, the civic slander and the spite. Ring in the love of truth and right. Ring in the common love of good. Ring out old shapes of foul disease. Ring out the narrowing lust of gold. Ring out the 1,000 wars of old. Ring in the 1,000 years of peace. Ring in the valiant man and free, the larger heart, the kindlier hand. Ring out the darkness of the land, and ring in the Christ that is to be. Darrel and I wish you a very Merry Christmas.